Please welcome moderator Gavin Bade and panelists.
Hello. Well, mahalo and hello, everyone. Thank you so much for sticking it out for the last panel of the conference here. We think we've got a cracker for you. We're going to consider the costs and benefits of getting to 100% renewables. And some of you know me. My name's Gavin Bade. I'm the senior reporter at Utility Dive. We're an electric utility trade publication based in Washington, D.C. As I said before on the stage, my third time at the Maui Energy Conference. Always love coming out here because we really love watching what you guys are doing out here to transform the electricity system. But we know that those transformations don't come without trade-offs and costs and hard decisions to make. And that's what we want to talk about here today is we know that everyone is very committed in Hawaii to getting to a clean energy future, 100% renewables. And we on this stage support renewable energy and all of those goals. But we also want to have a very informed and critical debate about the pluses and minuses of such an ambitious and, in the terms of your economy, unique goal. So that's just to give my panelists a little bit of cover here to tell you that we're all doing this, it's all love, you know what I mean? We're gonna talk about renewables, we're gonna talk about cost, but it's all love, everyone. We all know that we're going into the same future together. With that, I'd like to introduce our panelists here. To my right, we've got Jeff Mikulina of the Blue Planet Foundation. Welcome, Jeff.
Thanks, Gavin.
And to his right, we've got Rick Rocheleau. God, did I? No.
Close enough.
Will you help me out here, Rick?
Rocheleau.
Rocheleau. It's always those French names. In any case, of the Hawaii Natural Energy Institute. And we're going to kick off here with a little bit of a backstory for anyone who's forgotten how you all got your 100% renewables goal. Jeff is going to walk us through a little bit of the background here.
Sure. Thanks, Gavin. I just want to give a shout out to Fred and Doug and everyone who put this conference together. I thought it was an excellent job the past 2 days, so maybe we can give them a round of applause. And just to kick things off, you know, I've been surveying some of you about the title of this session, Is It Worth the Cost? And in talking with a good number of you, the survey results are in, 124% of you say that yes, it is worth the cost. Simply proving Henry Curtis's assertion that we need to change the equation for the RPS calculation. But some history, you know, Hawaii, obviously HCEI, 10 years old, that set out an ambitious target of 70% by 2030. That 70% was broken into the 40% renewable, 30% EEPS efficiency goal. And I think many of us were talking and watching the planning process happen and asking, what happens in 2031? Are we building a system that's designed around 60% fossil fuel in 2031? Are we leaving money on the table because we haven't set that ultimate destination that I think we're all striving for, which is eliminating fossil fuel from our economy, and therefore making suboptimal investment choices because we're targeting a 40% by a certain date? And that led Blue Planet Foundation and others to start having this conversation about mandating 100%. It was funny when we first proposed the bill in 2013, we were called magical thinkers. It didn't get out of the first committee at the legislature. The utility said it was going to be impossible or impossibly expensive. I think the governor at the time also called me Harry Potter. And then 2014, we pushed it again. It made a little bit further. The landscape really shifted in 2015, and the law passed, and David Ige signed it into law. A number of things happened right around that period that were interesting. Obviously, we had a utility that was looking at a merger. We had a new CEO of the utility. We had a new chair of the Public Utilities Commission. We had a new governor. So there are some outside external pressures that I think encouraged the legislature to act and become the first state in the nation with 100% renewable target. But just to close the story, interesting, the minute it was signed, the conversation really changed. I mean, we saw headlines around the world pointing to Hawaii, setting this ambitious target. We saw it as something that really fostered collaboration. It aligned the planning process with this new end goal and unlocked quite a bit of innovation. Interesting that it also, I think, brought a lot of attention to Hawaii and our goal. Other states are now looking at 100% renewable energy targets. When we set 2045, it was the product of a legislative process. We were shooting for 2040, if you recall. I think the utility at the time kind of said 2050 is safe. It came down to the final hours of the legislature, and what happened? They met in the middle. And even to this day, people ask, well, what sort of economic analysis or engineering analysis was behind 2045? And we met in the middle. And then to see California today with a bill that's pending to set a 100% renewable energy target for that state, the 6th largest economy on earth, at 2045 is remarkable. And they're really looking at Hawaii and mimicking, Hawaii's law. So we do, I think, play an outsized, we have some outsized influence, I think, on other actors. So that's the story in a large nutshell.
Well, thanks so much, Jeff, and I definitely feel your pain when it comes to the Harry Potter jokes, though maybe for a different reason. The bane of my, so if you can even, my glasses used to be more round. So in any case, so in the years since Hawaii has, set this very ambitious goal, there's been a number of scholarly analyses that have come out to analyze, how to get to 100% renewables or how to get to a very high percentage of renewable system. And just from my standpoint, I'm no expert, but as a reporter, just seeing these studies come out, it seems that a lot of the reputable ones came to similar conclusions, that when you get to a very high level of renewable resources, whether it's 75, 80, 85%, it's going to get a lot more difficult to get to that final push to 100. And there have been some analyses that say you'll need to overbuild your intermittent renewables. You'll need some sort of dispatchable power in there somewhere. And obviously, this has been a big debate within the power system, within the power sector. If you've followed the Jacobson, you could call it a debacle, that scholarly debate between he and a lot of other people. That's all to say that there's some scholarly work out there that says that getting to 100% may be difficult, especially in those late years when you're just getting up to 100%. Rick, I want to turn to you next because you've done some modeling on Hawaii that I understand comes to some similar conclusions. Could you outline those for us?
Geez, you let Jeff go first. I thought I was going to be on that side and not on the other side here. So. Yeah, just going directly at that question, the answer is yeah. I answer the question first and add to it. It is going to be very difficult. It's going to be difficult for a lot of reasons other than the obvious ones, I think, that we're going to need to address here as a community and a state. But, the bottom line is at the current time, it really depends on the renewables and the rest of your grid, what you can do. But if we're talking a primary dependence on intermittent energy, it fundamentally, and it's not the intermittency that's really the issue. I presented a couple of slides in the past, including at this conference. Intermittency means, the resource goes up and down over some relatively modest period of time, and you got to do something to moderate it, maintain productivity, and maintain reliability of the grid. The issue, to me, comes in a couple of places, and that is, it's what I would call variability. It's the longer term variability, the 2 weeks of rain that Kauai's having right now, the month of rain that we had earlier, and it actually exhibits itself in much shorter time frames than that. So there's a point where the cost that you pay for that, if you're really dependent on wind and solar, and there's been a number of studies, really starts to increase very substantially, very quickly at some level. And it's a function of the resource that you have, the technology mix that you have, the ability of the rest of the system that might still be out there to respond to those variabilities. So I think it's going to be very difficult to come up with a model without making some really sweeping assumptions about other changes in there that doesn't say at some point it gets more expensive. Doesn't mean we don't push it. It doesn't mean we don't see how close we can get. But just to kind of put in perspective, Jeff says the conversation changed the minute we had the 100% goal, and I think my first comment was, I hope we don't forget 40 and 50% and how to get there. So I think there's an equal risk that if our vision is too much focused on 100%, we're not going to do smart, cost-effective development that benefits everybody to get to the 50% or 60% mark. And that needs to be done in a way that we can continue to develop beyond that. But there are significant community, economic, technological issues that really, I think, are just starting to be identified. I was saying in the back room that Patrick, in his last conversation, I thought, he just made my argument for me. He talked about a lot of sweeping changes with advanced control systems and distributed energy and information and things. And those are all viable, potential, and necessary tools. None of those are going to be inexpensive. So how we move forward in a cost-effective way that benefits everybody is going to take a lot of work by a lot of people, including everybody in this room.
Mm-hmm. Well, I totally take the point that, buying all of these new resources is going to be expensive as well, right? But if we look at the flip side of the equation, I remember Representative Lee's slide from yesterday. What's going to get more expensive, renewables or fossil fuels? And the entire chart was fossil fuels, right? That's just to say that the flip side of the equation is if you're putting in this stuff, you're pushing toward 100, you're not going to be paying for the bunker oil that you import, the diesel that you import to do those kind of things. I wonder, Jeff, do you kind of see this in the same way? What's the flip side of the equation for you? Obviously, adding all that renewables is going to cost money, but what's the cost of not adding it?
Yeah, and I'll say, Rick, I mean, we're in alignment here. I agree with you. And
I know that.
all right, you're 80% correct. The last 20% is going to be challenging.
Let's make it a debate here, guys. Come on.
And it's true, and I'm confident too. On the way to 100, we're going to go through 40 and 50 and 60%. So it's where are we optimize? What are we optimizing for? And I think the fear is if we do, have these incremental targets and we optimize around a 40% or 50%, we might be making investment decisions. We might be, locking up capital in long-term, fossil choices. I mean, we had this with when we were flirting with importing LNG for a while. Long-term assets that we're going to be paying for over time, which means we're spending $1 here and not spending $1 on advancement that might get us to that ultimate goal of 100%. Mm-hmm. If I could, I'd like to expand it a little bit too, and this is what I think frustrates me about the conversation, particularly when we say, is it worth the cost? I think the question should be, can we afford not to do it? Mm-hmm. And here we look broader than the dollars and cents. And I mean, at this day and age, we have to talk about climate and in our carbon-constrained world that we live in. Is it worth that incremental cost of those added carbon emissions when we know the state has signed on to Paris? We have a very small carbon budget to spend. If we're not going to squeeze out every last molecule from our electricity side, where are we going to get those reductions? Our other sectors are tough. We've talked about transportation and the challenges there, let alone aviation. I mean, to get carbon emission reductions out of those sectors is going to be incredibly hard. So I think we need to turn again to electricity. How quickly can we squeeze out all of that carbon?
You look like you want to add something, Rick.
Yeah, we could almost, we'll go 60% agreement this time. Yeah, I agree. It's really important to keep these other issues in mind. And in fact, one of my written down bullets that I brought just as a comfort blanket there, even though I don't have time to look at it, was I think we really need to get away from this being just renewable energy. And obviously, this conference was largely focused on carbon. I wasn't here yesterday, I apologize, but there's the risk or the energy security of what happens to oil going into the future. We saw what happened to Puerto Rico. There's the resiliency issue. There's the economic development. And it's really easy to kind of have a platitude or a simple assumption about what those are. But I think going forward, we really need to address those much more rigorously in terms of which ones are important, which ones we're willing to pay for. If things are not cheaper, and if you can do it cheaper, that's great. I don't know that that's a preordained conclusion that these things are all going to be cheaper. But what are we willing to pay for? But it means we have to do it smart. So it means if the goal is to get to a high number quickly, we may not be doing even the optimal to get to the next higher number. So I agree we want to move forward. I agree having the vision of a very high number ultimately is a great goal. But if we're not smart about how we get there, we could make very suboptimal decisions and actually not address other issues that might be even more important than just the percent of renewables on the grid.
Interesting. I want to switch. I want to kind of dovetail off that and talk a little bit about how we can get to that really, really high number, whether it's 100 or 99 or whatever. Let's say I think we can all agree that going forward, a large amount of the electricity in Hawaii and probably in other economies is going to come from variable, zero marginal cost renewable resources, largely wind and solar, right? So once you get up to the very high echelons, very, very high penetrations of those resources, as we've already kind of established, it seems like you'll have to have some sort of dispatchable resource, whether it's on the generation side or the load side, to kind of balance it out, right? So let's talk about what those kind of what I would say the keystone resources to 100% renewables could be. You know, what are the options, what are the tools in the tool chest to kind of balance out a grid that's maybe 80% wind and solar? Who wants to start with that, DZ?
I'm going to go first since I'm not sure I know the answer, and that way Jeff can give us the real answer. I agree 100%. You know, however you define it, our grids are designed, and our end users, our consumers, our ratepayers, you know, expect reliable, you know, high quality power. So, you know, you might be able to relax things a little bit and move the needle a little bit on what you can do, but ultimately that's one of the criteria that has to be met. One of the issues, you know, and the simple model going forward is a lot of solar and a lot of storage. Is at some point the marginal value of that storage decreases, you know, and if you run models and you put.
So can you just explain what you mean by that? You mean as you add a lot more storage, the value of each. Go ahead.
The ability to use that storage at its full value or its full potential diminishes, and it has to do again with that variability of the resource. That, you know, and it's easy to think that if I overbuild a resource and then I look at how much energy do I have on a given day that I want to store and move to the next day or into the day. If I'm the first system out there, it's easy for me to store it and move it to a time when I need it. If you look at that curve of the what I'll call the curtailed energy, what you wouldn't be able to take if you didn't have storage, there's still days where the wind's not blowing, the sun's not very bright, even though it seems that you're overbuilt, you can put it all in the grid. In the extreme, trade winds are blowing, the sky's bright, all the solar's working, it's a huge number. So as you go up that scale of more and more storage, you capture more of that excess energy, if you want to call it not curtailed.
Sure.
But it comes at a cost. It's a lot of days that you don't use that storage. It's really the reason, one of the reasons that the costs, you know, start to go high at the end. Mm-hmm. Either way, whether it's storage or something else, if you talk about dispatchable energy, dispatchable energy, you can put batteries on the systems, and you can do calculations and look at their ability to provide capacity to the grid. And that's being done. And you're going to run into the same thing. There's going to be some marginal return of a point where it gets very difficult to do. But the point is, yes, we are going to need dispatchable energy. I think if you look at the PSIP and you look at common stuff that it seems we have available, the Big Island is pretty well covered. They've got some biomass opportunities. They've got geothermal. They're taking advantage of those. That's probably why they're in the lead in terms of meeting, you know, the resource needs of the demand. The KIUC is doing very well. They have the potential for hydro. Without that, things get a little more difficult for them as well. The one that's kind of hanging over us is what do we do on Oahu, which is about somewhere around 70 to 75%, depending what numbers you look at, of our electric use. We are probably more resource constrained. We are certainly not going to grow the biomass or the biofuels needed on that island. So you're now talking infrastructure, you're talking cost. Unless you open up some relatively old issues, you're probably not talking geothermal. And so really, I think that dispatchable energy and at what point it comes in and how do we do it is an open question. It's one of the ones that probably needs a lot more work and a lot more research, and I look forward to how Jeff's going to do it. I mean, and I'm not trying to be trite or put him on the spot, but it's a critical issue. You know, what else is out there that we can cost effectively integrate to provide the grid reliability as we get to the high levels of intermittent?
What is cost-effective out there,
Thank
Jeff?
God we have this Hawaii Natural Energy Institute that's working away every day on these solutions and solely focused on natural. First of all, the challenge with this conversation, having this conversation today, we're talking about 100% goal, that's 2045. You know, we do have over a quarter century. Hopefully we'll get there in much, much faster than 25 years from now. But the challenge is, I mean, we're looking at it through the lens, from the vantage we are today with the quiver of technological solutions that we have with us today. But we know the trend is not our destiny. Bill Gates like to say, we tend to overestimate the change we're going to see in the next 2 years, but we well underestimate what we're going to see over the next decade. And that's certainly held true for renewable energy in Hawaii. I mean, if we just reflect back on the last decade and the radical change we saw, first of all, HCI, we're kind of wrong on every single projection. There's no big wind, yet we still exceeded every renewable electricity target that we set. In 2008, when that HCI agreement came out, and again, these were some of the smartest folks in the room. You had Booz Allen, you had McKinsey, you had Department of Energy, you had Dawn in the room, and they came up with that goal of we're going to have 23 megawatts of rooftop solar by 2015. At the time, we had 1 megawatt of rooftop solar. So 23 megawatts was a pretty radical suggestion in 7 years back in 2008. But what happened in 2015? We didn't have 23 megawatts. We had over 350 megawatts of rooftop solar. So we were off by a factor of 15 for that PV revolution. And today, some 80,000 folks have power plants on their roof. So there is going to be some major disruptive change, I think, in the next decade that's going to cause this conversation, I think, to shift dramatically. I also think, we tend to talk about, okay, the first 70% we can do, but then it gets really tough at the end. That may hold. We could see, again, some black swan technology that we haven't seen, a flux capacitor, or dilithium crystal, or something else you have cooked up in the lab. But we could also have somewhat of a network effect. And you see these network effects in other technologies. Google is a great example. Mobile phones is probably the best example where, the first 2 people that had mobile phones, it kind of stunk. But as soon as you had that critical mass, then it got easier and easier, and it got more valuable to the user. So this is completely unbaked, but we could see a network effect with renewable energy. If we really see a revolution on the distributed energy resource side, we have a lot of electric vehicles out there. We have a lot of flexible load out there. We have a lot of batteries in various buildings and homes. And all of a sudden, we have a network that we can call upon that right now it's very limited. But think 5-10 years from now, all of a sudden people, and you price it right, you put a call for energy, I need storage for 36 hours, and we have 100,000 vehicles out there. Well, this person's out of town. Use my home battery, use my electric vehicle battery. There could be all sorts of things that we see where that last 20% becomes easier than the first 20%. Just speculating, we're operating from a place of complete uncertainty.
So the dynamic load could make things easier and maybe, take away some of the need for some dispatchable stuff. No, Rick, I think you look like you
Well, I was going to pull
something.
it back even to before we're at this, quote, dispatchable load requirement, and try to do this in a positive way. But if we're looking forward and we're saying over the next decade, we're going to see revolutionary changes, and technology is changing quickly, it's all the more reason that we need to do this at a measured pace. I mean, we got to keep moving forward. There's been huge learning curve by the utility, and it's easy to give an example. Jeff already gave one about, we did these studies, and even when PV was low, we didn't have the wind, and then things exceeded it. If you look at Maui and what was done here and with utility, we were involved in some of the wind integration studies on Maui. The models we developed with GE for the Big Island. Maui was next. Some of it was done confidentially. But at the time of those studies, there was quite a bit of concern about curtailment of wind with the building out of 3 wind farms. Rate structures were put in place to address that. Assumptions were being made about how far could PV go, and I think the outside case in that, in terms of PV on the grid, was 35 or 40 megawatts. If you look today at what's out there, there's, I think, 100 megawatts on Maui. Curtailment of that wind farm is probably no worse than it was, maybe certainly better than when it first started. So the utility has learned a lot. So when you talk about cost, part of this is there has been a learning curve to learn how to do things and learn how to integrate stuff. But that learning curve can take time, and new technologies take time. So it comes back to we need to keep making progress. We need to keep adding to what we're doing. But we need to do it in a way that leaves some door open for these revolutionary changes, for new technology. So we have to be a little careful we don't get so far out ahead. If we invest, we're investing in 20, 30, 40-year technology. if things change in a decade, we want to also have room to bring that in, and not just for the last 20%. So I think it's just a matter about being smart in the build out and make sure we've addressed all the issues and not just put things on for the sake of meeting a number and a goal. Good to have a goal, and we want to keep moving towards it, but let's make sure we're smart about it.
Yeah, you certainly do. You don't want to overcommit to a certain technology when there could be a better one coming around the corner, right?
I would
I
just
lost my
jump,
train of thought, so Jeff, go ahead.
I would just jump in and say, you're right. We have 70% to solve. We have a big chunk to solve for sure. And the good news is today we have no regrets choices that we can make. And KUC provides a great example. A few years back we were talking about procuring a very expensive resource with the hopes of getting it 17 cents per kilowatt hour. KUC is signing contracts for under 11 cents per kWh for solar at night. That's a game changer. If we can procure that, we should be doing it all day and all night and signing up as many contracts as we can. That's a no regrets sort of choice we can make today. And if something else comes along, again, we have 70% to solve. Let's do it. But in the meantime, we got to be doing the no regrets stuff today.
Okay, I agree entirely, and then I'm going to take Gavin's next question away from
stop right there.
It's time for it to get into it. We need to do that, but in doing it, we need to also address something that I think I think if we're honest about it, lessons we've learned is that there have been winners and losers, and it kind of goes back to the question of has the cost been worth it? If you've got net energy metering and PV on your house and you're part of that system, absolutely, that cost was worth it. If you're in the, I'll call it PV non-attainment area, it's not so obvious the cost has been worth it. So there are ways we can move forward, and we can certainly go. When you talk about getting to 50 or 60, that's effectively a doubling of where we are today. And when you think what's out there now, that's a lot. And we do want to go further. But we need to do it in a way that everybody benefits, not just a fraction of the population. And I think some of the things we talk about do take into account the entire population, but I think we're still looking at potential solutions that are very selective in who the winners are, and we have to make sure that the long-term policy is going to address it for everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, this issue of equity is a really, really big one, right? That, the electricity sector in its beginnings was built on the foundation of non-discriminatory service, right? That, you and I and Jeff all get the same electricity service, no matter if, I'm Mr. Moneybags and, you're living in the poorer part of town. With the rise of DERs, we've seen much increased choice, right? But a lot of times when you see that in a market economy and there's not something to back it up, the choice leads to some sort of inequality. And I think that's what we're kind of seeing with DERs right now. So the question is, what do we as policymakers, energy thinkers, and folks at the utility as well, what do we do to make these benefits of the clean energy revolution come home not only to middle class and wealthy folks here, but people who maybe aren't that?
First, I'll say I agree with Rick 100% on this. This is absolutely essential to address. You're right that the benefits have been lumpy for DERs in particular, and EV adoption. Let's not forget, though, there are some overall benefits that don't just accrue to those participants. Obviously, when you reduce oil use, there's import substitution benefits, there's job growth benefits, there's climate benefits, and that accrues to the population as a whole. But nonetheless, we should make sure that everyone has an opportunity to benefit with renewable energy, and that's why it's been a priority at Blue Planet, pushing for community renewables. We're excited that that's going to be taking effect this year, we hope. At least up to 8 megawatts and shooting for 72 megawatts, something where everyone can participate. You're a renter, you're a small business owner that doesn't have a roof in a solar non-attainment area, but you can get credit for a renewable energy project that you invest in. A great tool. We should also open up financing tools to make sure that anyone can also participate. On-bill financing, PACE, things like that, to really make it accessible and democratize access to clean energy. That's important. In Hawaii in particular, ohana means family. It means we all go together, and it's important to us that we all go together on this journey to 100%.
So I think that on-bill financing point is an interesting one, and it's something that we see some co-ops down in the South in Arkansas and other places doing for efficiency upgrades. They call it pay as you save. It's an interesting concept, right? I was just kind of brainstorming before as well, and couldn't you as a utility say to a DER provider, okay, we need 10 megawatts of solar on rooftops, but there's a low income, rider on this that you have to go and get people from a certain income bracket. Are there any, I don't know, as you said, that's a half-baked idea. I just came up with it backstage, but are there some other ideas that we have on bill financing, selective RFPs, things like that? What are some other things that a utility can do to help spread the love of the distributed energy resource revolution around? Rick?
I got one just off the
Okay,
top
go
of my
ahead.
head.
Yeah, go.
Go ahead.
While you're thinking, and this is just interesting. It was San Diego Gas and Electric. They, for electric vehicles, trying to obviously increase adoption of electric vehicles, offered a $1,000 rebate to a select class. And this, you could view this as somewhat discriminatory, but they picked first responders and public school teachers as recipients of a $1,000 rebate for an electric vehicle. And they took that not out of the rate base, they took it out of their profit side. And they made, I think, 500 available. Kind of an interesting idea. But there are all sorts of tools I think we could do to really make it less regressive and make it more accessible to all. Pay as you save, as you mentioned, the utility has had on-bill financing for a century for power plants. So this would just be extending it to ratepayers to do it for renewables or efficiency.
That's a good point. Rick, I know that you have some feelings about on-bill financing, though. Could you
Well,
elaborate?
I don't have any, I don't, I don't think I'm about on-bill financing in general. I think we need to be careful that things that extend it to the community don't just incrementally add another small section of the community and it's not fully broad. So I think the first thing is that it really gets identified and prioritized by everybody that's involved in the process so that we do look for creative solutions. I don't have the here's what we ought to do solution. I think some of the proposed solutions expand the base partly, but not to the extent it really needs to be expanded. And so I think it's a discussion that we need to have very seriously as we develop policies and look at what we're doing going forward and get more people engaged than the two of us, because I'm going to offer relatively little in terms of direct solutions. I just I'm good at seeing the problems. I actually have some solutions too, but this one is going to take a lot of work.
Interesting. I want to shift gears a little bit here in the last couple minutes and talk about some of the environmental costs of going to 100% renewables, right? So I'm seeing some questions about, whether a 100% renewables grid will be zero carbon. Biomass that we talked about in the Big Island will emit, unless it's captured, will emit CO2. And then there are other environmental issues with the siting of a lot of these other resources. I'm seeing something, what if we built a pumped hydro system on every island because there are mountains? Well, I would think that there are some siting issues, some environmental issues with land use with that. We saw that with the siting of wind farms. As we add more and more renewables to the system, what are some consequences? Because these things are not very dense in terms of, just the land use that they use. It's not like, a big nuclear plant where you can put a gigawatt on a few acres, right? Or on a lot of acres, right? But I guess what I'm getting at is as we ramp up all of this renewable energy, how can we make sure that Hawaii keeps its natural beauty and the spiritual connection that so many people feel to the natural environment here?
Do you want me to go first? Yeah, I think that's it kind of falls in that bucket of things that we got to figure out how we prioritize that over, we got the carbon, we have the land use, we have, cultural and societal aspects of that, we got environmental. We really, we've pushed and we've made it to where we are now, and all these other issues, including the resiliency and risk issues. And I think part of what we need to do is to really reopen some of that debate and figure out where we are. I mean, I kind of throw a number out, and wind isn't necessarily a solution, but when people talk about, about wind for Oahu, I say, well, if we wanted to get, and it's my difficulty getting to the 100% number, so I use 70% as my number, but if I want to get to 70% wind and I assume something, fairly good, like a 40% capacity factor, and I say, let me build wind turbines as big or slightly bigger than what I have on the North Shore, I need 700 more wind turbines, the size of what's up on the North Shore right now. I think, that really puts in perspective. Now, if I go to PV at half the capacity factor, I need twice as many megawatts, and it turns into a lot of land area. If it's rooftop, it's a little easier, but once it becomes land, it gets more difficult. I think it's just one of these other things that when we look at percentages, we need to come back and put real numbers on it and figure out what we're willing to pay and what those impacts are as we go forward. Smart development, keep it moving, but let's put real numbers and real impacts on it as we make these decisions going forward. And they all need to be considered.
There's certainly going to be trade-offs with any energy choice. And I think climate disruption is pretty ugly too. And I think as a society, we need to come together too and just appreciate that we might be bringing some of those visual impacts home for some of this stuff. Offshore wind could be a question. But again, I see this technological change happening so quickly that we will have solutions that should be more acceptable over time. And as we see this revolution kind of spread out, that I think folks will understand more that this is something, these are decisions we have to make. The alternative is untenable. We can't make those trade-offs anymore regarding carbon.
That last statement that people will see it more, I think that's another area where we need to do more. And I know Blue Planet does a lot on this. We really need to get more of the community involved and educated on what we're doing, and so they understand those trade-offs. But it also goes back to, are they getting benefits from them that are tangible, that they can, the guy barely paying for his car and hoping to get to work and not have to ride the bus is a little less concerned about global warming than somebody sitting on a big house and time to read and do other things. So I think we need to put these, different issues into perspective and make sure we're addressing all of them going forward.
Certainly, it'll be important for everyone to perhaps see economic benefits from this transition to 100% renewables. Would you both say that that's a thing there?
I think economics are one lever. There are a lot of other levers we can pull too, and that's too often. I think a lot of us are technologists and we look at that technology change, but there are, again, other levers. There's the economics that kind of parallels that. There's the social, behavioral kind of levers, just getting people to act different, and that's I think a fundamental to Blue Planet Foundation is we believe we have everything we need to change the energy culture, to change our expectations and our views of energy and how we use it. Because too often what's left out of this conversation is efficiency and those simple things that we can do today. There are barriers, there are habitual barriers and institutional barriers. Can't put a clothesline, because my homeowners association prevents it. But doing those behavioral things and overcoming those barriers are sometimes easier than overcoming the economic or the technological.
Mm-hmm.
Just one comment, if we can overcome those barriers, and again, I agree, you guys are doing a lot on that, but one of the things, the 100%, one of the things the 100% goal did is it really brought a lot of attention to Hawaii. Mm-hmm. So it's another reason why we need to do it right, because there are a lot of people looking at what we do. They're trying to figure out how to move forward. And the reality is, if you're looking at the global climate change picture, their systems and their impacts are much, much bigger than ours. So it's great for us to meet Hawaii's needs, but if we can be a model for how to do it right, the impact can be a lot bigger than just solving Hawaii's problem.
Can we just drop the mic right now for Rick? He said it.
We've got a little bit more time left, and I still have the hardest question to ask you guys. So I think that we've been very successful in identifying a number of trade-offs and issues that we're going to face as Hawaii goes toward 100% renewables. But in the last few minutes that we have here, I wonder if there are any policy changes or potential policy changes that we should think about that we can name up here and say, going forward, we can't fix everything right now. We don't know what everything is going to do, but we know that we can at least do this. I was thinking, are there changes to the definition of renewables under the RPS that we should be thinking about? Should we be thinking about not just 100% renewables goal, but a low or no carbon goal to lay over top of that? Do we need to think about, changing the benchmarks along the way or changing the eventual goal? Are any of those, do you guys have any policy changes that if you ran the zoo, that you could do tomorrow and perhaps improve the situation?
When you say zoo, you're referring to, but yeah, there are some policies that are pending right now at the legislature. And one of them is what you just mentioned, changing that equation. We've been supportive of a bill now for 3 years to just get the math right. That's a basic one to make sure that we're actually calculating 100% means 100%. We also believe it should be expanded to all equipment that's attached to the grid, all connected generation, which includes, combined heat and power, any gas. We think it should also apply to all sectors, including the gas industry. We should all be on the road to 100%. And then expand that further to transportation so we can really get the synergies between transportation and energy. In addition, you mentioned carbon, and again, we agree here. I think the belt and suspenders approach of having a carbon standard in a way or a zero carbon goal would really help tighten up and make sure we're making the right choices on our path to 100%.
Rick, what about you?
I agree with those things. I think we need to go back and it's not a single policy, but I think we need to look at all of these really big issues that we've talked about and have been talked about by a lot of people. It's the risk, it's the resiliency, it's the carbon, and figure out what the right mix of policy is to make sure we're addressing all of those in a way that's really optimal. I mean, it's not, and we got to be careful. If you do one, you may really, if that's the only one and you're not considering the other impacts, it may have impacts that are really not what you desire. And so, hopefully we can kind of put that together and start that debate a little bit more and figure out, policies are going to get introduced every year. Keep it moving.
Keep it moving. A couple minutes left here. I just want to ask how the utility factors into this. They're rolling out a new integrated grid planning process that they think is going to kind of be the successor to the PSIP that we all love. No one loves so much over the past 3 iterations of the plan. I wonder if you guys are looking at the utility, what's your message to them in how they should be looking at reaching out to other stakeholders, planning their resources? What's your message to HECO up here today?
Move quickly. I mean, this RFP, every day counts because we see that tax credit going away, the federal tax credit. So every day we have the potential to lose so much, so moving quickly on that. That approach that you mentioned is wise in terms of casting the net, seeing what the real prices are for those resources, and then building a plan, a realistic plan about what's possible to be procured quickly. But yeah, moving quickly and again, for 100 years, they own this resource. It's been a fairly stable business. The whole world has turned upside down now. And the quicker we think they can get to that integrator sort of model, that internet service provider model, where they become the place where people plug in, the prices are visible and transparent, and it'll just get the market moving. Just like we saw the market moving for photovoltaic for a variety of reasons, we can see the market moving for EVs, for storage, for demand flexibility by having that open grid with clear prices and just see how fast we can move. Move at the speed of the ambition that we have out there as opposed to inertia of the incumbent model.
The speed of ambition, not the speed of inertia. I like that. For those who are unfamiliar, the integrated grid planning basically seeks to, and I hope someone from HECO will correct me when I butcher this, basically seeks to take the cost estimating out of the generation planning process. So instead of doing cost estimates, they want to just run RFIs and RFPs, requests for proposals, for resources, and then get the actual prices to submit to the commission instead of the figurative prices. They think that this is going to result in a more integrated, just a clearer picture of the generation costs and help them to plan out the future much better. It also allows them to kind of plan T&D upgrades at the same time. So there will be more coming out about that, I'm sure, in the next few weeks, but I just wanted to give a download for people who didn't quite maybe know what we were talking about with integrated grid planning, because I was ignorant until yesterday. In any case.
And I'm going to go out on the limb a little bit, since I'm somewhat involved in that. I think it's a little broader than just going out and getting real prices and real costs. It's an effort. I mean, the system has changed, and I think the utilities recognize that the generation and transmission and distribution are no longer separate. And so the planning needs to be integrated in. But I think if it's done correctly, I think can also help to integrate some of these other aspects that we've talked about up here. So my hope in the process is that not only will it integrate the planning that the utility already does in maybe a more coherent fashion, be it to take care of DER a little bit better, but also maybe be a little bit more, little higher fidelity in how you address some of the other community concerns or community goals that typically get mentioned, they get kind of discussed, but they're an afterthought to the generic grid planning that's done. And so I'd like to see that more up front myself.
Fantastic. Well, fewer than 90 seconds left. One last question for both of you. March 2018 AD, sitting up here on stage, 100% renewables. Is it worth the cost?
I'll answer for Rick. The answer is yes. And my favorite analogy with this is thinking about John F. Kennedy in 1961 saying, by the end of the decade, we're going to land a man on the moon and return him safely. If he would have said, we're going to go 82% of the way to the moon, turn around, and come back, he wouldn't have inspired the nation to get behind something so audacious that led to that technological revolution that made that goal possible. So, a goal is a dream with a deadline. We think we can do it. We hope it happens a lot more than 25 years away, but we're confident that we're going to get there at a price that's lower than status quo.
And if we can get there at a price that's even a little bit higher than status quo, I think it would be worth it.
Great answer, Rick. And before he closes up, can we just give Gavin a round of applause? Yeah. Not for this, but for those of you who read Utility Dive, this guy produces a daily, download of everything that's happening in the utility industry and energy industry. That's just phenomenal. And for a 13-year-old to be doing this is just incredible.
Thank you, Jeff. And I have to say that, I have really enjoyed my time at Utility Dive, but I would be absolutely nothing without my great team back in Washington and across the nation. So Christy, Larry, Herman, Robert, and Peter, y'all are the real champions out there. And if any of you are listening, which you're not, big ups to them. Ladies and gentlemen, let's thank these two fine gentlemen up here for a great panel discussion.